The Russia-Ukraine war has entered day 1645. Register that, ladies and gentlemen, 1645, with neither side showing signs of backing down. Russia is intensifying missile attacks as Ukraine runs short of air defense interceptors, while Ukrainian strikes are disrupting Russian refineries, their fuel supplies and logistics. Yet, amid mounting economic and civilian costs, meaningful peace negotiations continue to remain stalled. Whether they happen or not is something to be seen maybe in a couple of weeks, or if both the parties are really wanting to move in that direction. We've been joined by two guests. Let me introduce them to you one by one. Cormac Smith, who's a former British diplomat, joins us from central London. Cormac, thank you very much to have joined us. We'll also be joined by Dimitri, who's a Russian political commentator, who will join us from Moscow. We'll begin with Cormac. Cormac, Russia is exploiting Ukraine's shortage of Patriot interceptors to intensify its ballistic missile attacks, while Ukraine is striking refineries and logistic hubs deep inside of Russia. What impact are these attacks having on the military balance and on civilians on the both sides of the coin? Ukrainian strikes have damaged major Russian refineries and have contributed to domestic fuel pressure, with Moscow reportedly preparing to extend restrictions on diesel exports. How severe is Russia's energy shortage, and can these attacks genuinely weaken its ability to finance and sustain the war?
Okay, Omar, hello. It's good to join you. There are two questions there. First, I will address the effect that these attacks and the lack of Patriot interceptors are having on the Ukrainian people. I speak to friends in Ukrainian cities, Kyiv mostly, every day, and they are having it really, really hard. The civilian death toll is mounting, but I get absolutely no sense that they are anywhere near to give in, and I believe that this is a tactic of Putin to try and break the will of the Ukrainian people. Most of these missiles are indeed aimed at civilian targets. Secondly, the effect that we believe the Ukrainian deep attacks are having on the Russian economy, I think, are quite severe. The latest figures that I've been looking at from analysts around the world, Russia's oil exports are now down 50% in 50 different oblasts around the Russian Federation, or Russian-controlled oblasts have introduced rationing. The economy currently is beginning to stagnate, and in fact, the budget deficit by May had already reached what it was budgeted to reach for the whole year, and we would expect that Russia's budget deficit by the end of the year will be 2 to 3 times what it originally was. The Russian economy is stagnating. How long Russia can sustain this for, I don't know. I'm not going to predict the collapse of the Russian economy. The one other thing that I would say is that critically, this is a war economy. 40% of Russia's government budget is devoted to the war. So what does that look like for the Russian economy post-war, if and when we get there? And we must get there sooner or later. You will have 1.5 million to 2 million troops returning with no work. Many of them are rapists, murderers, looters, and so forth. This is going to have a destabilizing effect on Russia. And what's Russia going to do without a war, given that currently 40% of its government budget is dedicated to war? So I hope that answers the question. It's extremely tough on the Ukrainian people. We're hoping that our allies in the West can replace the American patriots. That is President Zelensky's priority at the moment, and there are many discussions going on. But yeah, very, very tough on my friends that I speak to, but no way are they in any mood for giving up.
All right. Of course, there was a meeting also this Monday as well, where a lot of pledges were made as far as this is concerned. Cormac, speaking of that, at Monday's Coalition of the Willing summit in Kiev, Zelensky said Russia must be made to feel enough pain to enter negotiations. He also sought more air defenses, drone funding, and action against Russia's shadow fleet. Can European support deliver that very pressure, or is the strategy more likely to prolong and escalate the war?
Yeah, I believe that European support can achieve this. And, you know, I've been doing interviews on this since a month before the full-scale invasion, and I have said that we need to arm Ukraine to the teeth and sanction Russia back to the Stone Age. We have the capability to do that, but we have not done either of those things yet. You know, I would remind you that the European economy, if we take the UK in, is over 10 times the size of the Russian economy, and we have a population 4 times the size of the Russian economy. So we really should be able to do it, even if America is becoming a less reliable partner. What is very challenging at the moment is to replace the Patriot interceptors, which we're not getting from America, partly because of the war against Iran. But you know, the only question, a good Ukrainian friend of mine, a very senior diplomat, told me in the early days of this war, it's very simple, Cormac, he said, if we stop fighting, there will be no Ukraine. And Russia has made it very clear it wants to wipe Ukraine off the map, and Putin doesn't think Ukraine is a real country. If Russia stops fighting, there'll be no war. If Ukraine stops fighting, there will be no Ukraine. So, you know, this is only going to end when Putin or somebody else, if Putin is deposed, decides to finally come to the negotiating table. Zelensky has offered unconditional ceasefires over 10 times, and Putin has refused. Unfortunately, I do not see peace talks anytime this year.
This year. So, I mean, let's see what happens. But I think that at the end of the day, negotiations or such a process is the ultimate way forward. Dimitri Babish joins us from Moscow. Dimitri, thank you very much to have joined us. Ukraine, Dimitri, has intensified attacks on Russian refineries, airfields and logistics centers, openly seeking to raise the economic and social cost of the war. How badly has Russia actually been affected? And does Moscow regard attacks on commercial facilities as legitimate warfare or deliberate pressure on civilians? Also, Russia says that its attacks on Ukrainian ports and cargo vessels are aimed at military supplies, while Kiev says Moscow is trying to blockade its commercial shipping corridor. What evidence does Russia have for these claims, and how does it address concerns about global food security as well? Please enlighten us on this.
First, about global food security, because it's really important for our viewers and it's important for the world. Let me give you the figures. Not the fake figures that the previous speaker gave you, about 40% of Russian budget being spent on defense. This is pure rubbish. If you look at any statistics, Russian or objective Western statistics, of course, it's not the exact figure. Russia spends a lot on defense now, but certainly not 40% of its budget. Coming back to food security, the figures are as following. Ukraine supplies 12% of the wheat at the world market. Russia supplies 20%. Russia did not want to put the population of the world in danger. It was us who joined the so-called wheat deal, the so-called agreement brokered by Turkey in 2022, which opened the routes on the Black Sea for international shipping. It was, however, broken by the West, because part of the deal was that Russia would be able to get paid for its wheat via the international system of money transfers, the so-called SWIFT. So the deal was that Russian banks would get access to SWIFT. We were switched off from SWIFT in the beginning of the war by the West. So you cannot send wheat without being paid for it. And unfortunately, the West did not fulfill its promise. We could not get paid for our wheat. Nevertheless, we supplied it. But then also there were cases when Ukraine attacked Russian cargo ships with wheat, not only in the Black Sea, but even in the Mediterranean. If you look at the world press, you will see it. So basically what's going on is a terrible tragedy, but it's not a tragedy of our making. It is the West that puts the world food security and economy at risk by doing such things as attacking Iran, forcing Iran to close the Hormuz Straits, or helping Ukrainian nationalists oust the legally elected president in 2014 and provoking Russia into war. Talking about
Before we move on to COMEC, I'd like to understand something else. President Putin, Dimitri, has authorized temporary state control of critical infrastructure that private owners fail to protect. How serious has the Ukrainian drone threat become, and will this measure strengthen Russia's protection of its energy, transport and communications networks? What's the update on this very topic?
Yes, I'm coming to this. The official statistics in Russia is that since the beginning of the year, the so-called Ukrainian drones and missiles, which are mostly American-made, British-made, French-made drones and missiles, they killed in Russia 330 people and injured 2,200. So it's a real war being waged by the West, not only by Ukraine, but mostly by its Western allies, on Russia, on a nuclear power. That's a very dangerous escalation from the Western side. And of course, it was absolutely irresponsible for the British government to give the Ukrainian regime the drones, which are the so-called jet drones, the most modern generation of drones. Russia, of course, is trying to protect its facilities by all means. We have pretty good anti-aircraft defense, especially around Moscow. But since the West supplied Ukraine long-range drones, which can strike deep, even into Siberia, deep inside Russia, of course, it's impossible to protect all facilities, all installations. In this way, Ukraine, by the way, is destroying also Western property because they destroyed the oil infrastructure for transporting oil on the Baltic Sea, putting ecology in danger. They attacked the American and Kazakh-owned pipeline near the Caspian Sea, the so-called Caspian Consortium for transporting oil. So basically, the Ukrainian regime is desperate because they're losing the war on the ground. They cannot stop the Russian offensive. It has been continuing for 2 years now. And of course, they're trying to hit civilians and they're trying to hit oil refineries. But in Moscow today, I drove to my office without any problem. I buy gasoline. I don't see any lines for gasoline in Moscow or other big cities. Maybe there are some problems in Crimea, which has been devastated by Ukrainian drones. It's a very strange situation. Ukrainians say Crimea is their territory. They say the people who live there are their people, and they're killing these people in hundreds by drone attacks, and they're making their life unbearable by trying to destroy the bridge connecting Crimea to Russia and by striking oil refineries. So that's the picture for the moment.
All right, thank you very much to have given that picture. That was interesting to note as well. Coming to COMEC. COMEC, a recent poll finds that 82% of Ukrainians still believe that their country is going to win, although most expect the fighting to continue into the year 2027, which is just around the corner, or even beyond. How important is that public confidence when a former defense minister, Mikhailo Fedorov, is warning that Ukraine is slowly losing this war and lacks a clear strategy in order to gain victory? He also says the country is slowly losing because of manpower shortages, weak planning and internal dysfunction. I'd like your take on this because this is something that I'm really reading in all the main newspapers.
Yeah, look, the 82% figure supporting the war is very, very important. And, this is what I get from my Ukrainian friends at every level, both in government and in civil society and just ordinary Ukrainians, friends that I made when I worked for the Ukrainian government for 2 years. I go back to what I said. I was told if Russia stops fighting, there will be no war. It's Russia that started this war, and it's an illegal war, and the international community recognizes that. All they have to do is stop and go away tomorrow. If Ukraine stops fighting, they know there will be no Ukraine, because that's been made very clear. And I think this 82% figure really proves the fact that the majority of Ukrainian people know this. I have contacts in The Hague. There are over 250,000 war crimes registered and been investigated of rape, of torture, of murder, of looting, some of the most horrible crimes that have been carried out by basically ordinary Russian civilians who are in the Russian armed forces. And so the Ukrainian people know this very well. They are suffering under this, but they know that they cannot give up. I'm very, very happy to see that the resolve in the West is getting stronger. It's still not as stronger as I and a few of my friends want it to be. I would pick up Dimitri on one point. Up to recently, the majority of the long range munitions that have been used to strike deep inside Russia have been Ukrainian made. And the reason for that is we originally, in fact, the Brits were the first ones to give Storm Shadow back in 2023. And we have just given them the blueprints for Storm Shadow so the Ukrainians can develop their own more sophisticated weapons. But initially, both the Americans and the Europeans would not allow the weapons which we gave the Ukrainians to hit targets inside Russia. This was very unfair. So the Ukrainians, what they have done is they have gone and they have developed their own weapons, including the Flamingo, which is a cruise missile with a range of 3,000 kilometers and a warhead of 1.15 tons, I believe, bigger than anything we have given them. Now, certainly recently,
Comic, I'll just cut you short because we're getting a bit short of time, but I'd like to understand very shortly, how do you see the statements by Mr. Fedorov?
Mr. Fedorov, look, he has lost all credibility in Ukraine recently, and I think everybody I speak to and my reading of it, what he has done is he has let his own political ambitions ahead of his loyalty to his country. He has completely lost the support of the majority of Ukrainian people, and in fact, certainly people that I speak to, we would be very, very suspicious now of what Mr. Fedorov's motives are. So, as a Western observer who speaks to many, many Ukrainians, I would disregard what Fedorov said. I mean, he is tantamount to being a traitor at the moment with the things he is saying.
I'll stop you there, Cormac. We're a bit short of time. Thank you so very much to have joined us. As always, pleasure to talk to you, Cormac. Until next time. And of course, the pleasure is all ours, as always. Dimitri, my last question to you regards reports in different media regarding the visit of CIA Director John Ratcliffe that suggests that communication between Washington and Moscow somehow continues despite stalled peace efforts, while Ukraine is asking China to play a stronger diplomatic role in this conflict. Pakistan is also calling for an immediate cessation of hostilities. What could reopen serious negotiations between the two sides, and how does Russia view calls from China and Pakistan for diplomacy and an end to hostilities?
Well, first I have to say something about negotiations that would run counter to what Cormac said before. Unfortunately, he's wrong when he says that it's just so easy. Russia stops fighting and there is peace. Russia suggested several times to Ukraine to agree on a ceasefire, to agree on peace under certain conditions. You know, at least Ukraine should recognize that Crimea, which has always been a Russian territory until Mr. Khrushchev gave it to Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic in 1954, that Crimea is Russian. Right now, if we stop fighting, Mr. Zelensky will just get a few weeks, maybe months, to replenish his stockpiles of weapons, bio-Western weapons, and then he would be in his right to attack because Mr. Zelensky refused to make any concessions, to agree to any compromises with Russia. So that's the reason why there is no end to fighting. Russia cannot stop fighting because any stop would mean just letting Mr. Zelensky replenish his war chest.
Under these conditions, I would like to short answer, Dimitri, because we're getting short of time. How do you see the interventions by China and Pakistan in order to find some kind of a solution to this conflict?
I think Pakistani mediation would be very welcome. Our hope for the end of hostilities in Iran is Pakistani mediation. We follow all the reports from the Pakistani army chief, from the general staff, who play a very positive role in mediating between the United States and Iran, in the same way Pakistan could play a role in this conflict, which we didn't start and which, of course, we didn't want. China has been deceived by the Ukraine so many times. Chinese investors lost so much in Ukraine. And of course, the Chinese understand that this is not Ukraine's war against Russia. This is the West's war against Russia and China. If you look at the documents adopted by NATO, if you look at the documents adopted by the United States and the European Union, they all declare China a competitor at least. Sometimes they openly call China an enemy. And they all call Russia an enemy. So China understands if the West achieves its aims in Ukraine, if Russia is defeated, next target will be China and its ally Pakistan.
Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much, Dimitri Babish, to have joined us. We're short of time, or else I would have loved to continue this conversation with you. Very interesting.